Let me tell you something that might sting a little. The smartest people in the room are not the loudest, not the most aggressive, and not the ones who win every argument. The smartest people are the ones who refuse to let toxic people rent space in their heads. And if you've ever felt drained, manipulated, or small after being around someone, this is for you. Here's what I've learned after years of studying vulnerability, shame, and human behavior. Toxic people feed on reaction. They thrive on chaos. They depend on your emotional availability more than your kindness. And smart people, they don't play that game. They understand something powerful. You cannot control someone else's dysfunction, but you can control your exposure to it. When a toxic person criticizes them, smart people pause. They don't rush to defend. They don't scramble to prove their worth. They ask themselves one question: is this feedback, or is this projection that pauses everything? Because toxic people often hand you their shame wrapped as criticism. And if you're not aware, you'll carry it like it's yours. Smart people don't carry what doesn't belong to them. They recognize manipulation disguised as concern. They recognize guilt disguised as love. They recognize control disguised as protection. And instead of reacting, they respond with clarity. That clarity is not coldness. It's emotional intelligence. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows, I will not bleed for someone who refuses to heal. Smart people do something that frustrates toxic people deeply. They set boundaries without apology. Now, let me be honest with you. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments. They are not silent treatments. Boundaries are clarity. They are saying, this is what is okay, and this is what is not. And toxic people hate clarity because clarity removes control. When someone constantly disrespects them, interrupts them, gaslights them, or twists their words, smart people don't explode. They don't beg for understanding. They don't over-explain. They get very calm. And they say things like, I'm not comfortable with that. Or, I won't continue this conversation if you keep speaking to me that way. Or, even more powerful, no, not a long paragraph, not a dramatic speech. Just a clean, grounded no. Here's why that matters. Toxic people rely on your guilt. They rely on your fear of disappointing them. They rely on your desire to be seen as kind, loyal, or agreeable. But smart people understand something life-changing. Being kind does not mean being available for abuse. They are willing to be misunderstood. Let that sink in. They would rather be called cold than constantly feel emotionally bruised. They would rather disappoint someone than betray themselves. And when a boundary is crossed repeatedly, they don't threaten, they don't beg, they enforce it. Because a boundary without consequences is just a suggestion. And smart people don't make suggestions about their self-respect. Smart people do not try to fix toxic people. Let me say that again, because this is where so many strong, loving, capable people get trapped. They do not try to fix toxic people. They understand something that takes most of us years of heartbreak to learn. You cannot heal someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. Toxic people often present themselves as wounded, and sometimes they are. They tell you stories of betrayal, abandonment, injustice. And if you have empathy, you want to help. You want to soothe. You want to prove you're different. But here's the hard truth. Empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Smart people can sit with someone's pain without absorbing it. They can acknowledge someone's trauma without volunteering to become their emotional punching bag. They know the difference between support and sacrifice. When a toxic person says, you're the only one who understands me, smart people don't feel flattered. They feel cautious. Because they know isolation is a control tactic. When a toxic person says, everyone leaves me, smart people don't rush to promise forever. They pay attention. Patterns matter. They watch behavior, not words. And if they see manipulation, blame shifting, constant victimhood, they step back, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. Smart people understand this love is not rehabilitation. You can offer compassion, you can offer honesty, but you cannot offer your mental health as collateral for someone else's growth. And the moment they realize they are trying harder than the other person to make the relationship healthy. They stop. Because growth requires two willing people, and smart people refuse to do emotional labor for someone who refuses accountability. Smart people master something that feels almost impossible at first. They stop taking everything personally. Toxic people are experts at projection. They will call you selfish when you set a boundary. They will call you dramatic when you express pain. They will call you insecure when you ask for clarity. And if you are not careful, you will start questioning your own reality. But smart people pause and ask, whose story is this? Because not every accusation is a truth. Sometimes it's a confession. When someone lashes out, criticizes relentlessly, or tries to humiliate them, smart people don't immediately internalize it. They understand that people speak from their wounds, and wounded people often wound others to avoid facing themselves. That doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it explains it. Instead of spiraling into shame, smart people ground themselves. They check the facts. They reflect. They ask trusted people for perspective. They refuse to let one toxic voice override their inner knowing. This is emotional resilience. It's saying, I will examine feedback, but I will not swallow insults. It's recognizing that someone else's insecurity does not define your worth. Toxic people want a reaction. They want you defensive, confused, scrambling to prove yourself. But smart people don't perform for approval. They respond with steadiness. And sometimes that steadiness sounds like silence, not passive silence, not suppressed silence, but powerful silence, the kind that says, I know who I am, and your distortion of me does not change that. That is strength. That is clarity. And toxic people cannot manipulate what refuses to doubt itself. Smart people are not afraid to walk away. And I know that sounds simple, but walking away is one of the most emotionally demanding acts of courage you will ever practice. Because toxic relationships are rarely toxic all the time. There are good moments. There are apologies. There are flashes of the person you wish they would consistently be. And that's what keeps people stuck? Hope. But smart people understand the difference between potential and pattern. They don't stay because of who someone could be. They look at who that person repeatedly shows themselves to be. When disrespect becomes a cycle, when manipulation becomes predictable, when you feel more anxious than safe, smart people stop negotiating with reality. They don't wait for rock bottom. They don't wait for one more betrayal. They don't wait until they are completely broken. They leave when they see the pattern. And let me tell you something powerful. Walking away is not weakness. It is self-trust in action. It is saying, I deserve relationships that feel safe, not confusing. Toxic people will often escalate when they feel you pulling back. They'll love, bomb. They'll guilt trip. They'll rewrite history. They'll suddenly change. Smart people watch actions, not urgency, because real change is consistent and humble, not dramatic and temporary. And if leaving means being alone for a while, they choose peace over chaos. Every single time. Because solitude heals, but toxicity corrodes, and smart people refuse to stay where their spirit is slowly being eroded. Smart people protect their energy like it's sacred, because it is. Toxic people don't just drain your time. They drain your nervous system. After one conversation, you feel tense. After one visit, you feel exhausted. After one argument, you replay it for hours, sometimes days. Smart people pay attention to that. They notice how their body responds. Tight chest, shallow breathing, knots in the stomach. That's not drama. That's data. Your body keeps score. Instead of dismissing that discomfort, smart people honor it. They shorten conversations. They limit access. They stop engaging in circular arguments that go nowhere but deeper into confusion. They understand something critical. Not every invitation deserves a response. When a toxic person sends a provoking message, smart people don't fire back instantly. They step away from the phone. They let the emotional wave pass. They refuse to reward chaos with attention. Because attention is currency, and toxic people spend yours recklessly. Smart people create emotional distance when physical distance isn't possible. They use neutral responses. They don't overshare. They don't explain their vulnerabilities to someone who weaponizes them later. They become intentional about who gets access to their inner world. That's not cold. That's wise. They fill their lives with relationships that nourish them, conversations that feel mutual, safe, respectful. They recharge in spaces where they are not constantly defending their worth. Because here's the truth. You cannot build a meaningful life if you are constantly recovering from unnecessary emotional battles. Smart people guard their peace. Not because they don't care, but because they care deeply about where their energy goes. Smart people do not argue to win. They disengage to protect their sanity. Toxic people love circular conversations. They twist facts. They rewrite history. They move the goalpost every time you make a valid point. And before you know it, you're defending something you never even said. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a strategy. And smart people recognize the trap. They understand that you cannot have a rational conversation with someone who is committed to being right at all costs. So they stop trying to explain, logic, or prove, because clarity is not received by someone who is invested in distortion. When the conversation turns into gaslighting, that never happened. When accountability turns into blame, you made me do that. When your feelings are mocked instead of respected, smart people don't escalate. They simplify. They say, we see this differently. Or this conversation isn't productive. Or the most powerful line of all, I'm done discussing this. And then they mean it. No dramatic exit, no slam doors, just calm detachment. That calmness is infuriating to someone who feeds on reaction. But here's why it works. Toxic people want control. And control requires engagement. When you stop engaging, you remove their leverage. Smart people understand that some battles are designed to exhaust you, not resolve anything. And they refuse to spend hours trying to be understood by someone who is not trying to understand. Peace is more important than being right. And sometimes the smartest move is silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because your mental health is worth more than the argument. Smart people refuse to let toxic experiences harden their hearts. This is where real strength shows up, because after betrayal, manipulation, or constant criticism, the easiest thing to do is become guarded, to build walls so high that no one can reach you, to say, I'll never trust again. But smart people know the difference between boundaries and armor. Armor says no one gets close. Boundaries say the right people get close. Toxic people want you to believe everyone is like them. They want your world to shrink. They want your trust to disappear. Because if you stop believing in healthy connection, you might settle for unhealthy ones. Smart people don't let that happen. They process the pain. They feel the grief. They allow themselves to be angry, disappointed, heartbroken. They don't numb it. They don't pretend it didn't hurt. But they also refuse to let one person's dysfunction define their future relationships. They stay open, carefully, intentionally, courageously. They learn the lesson without absorbing the bitterness. That is emotional maturity. They say, I will not let someone else's inability to love me well turn me into someone who cannot love at all. They choose growth over resentment. They strengthen their intuition instead of silencing it. They pay attention to red flags sooner. They trust their gut faster. They walk away quicker. But they still believe in goodness. And that balance, that fierce tenderness, is what toxic people can never understand. Because staying open after being hurt is not weakness. It is bravery at its highest level. Smart people take radical responsibility for their own emotions. Here's the truth that most people avoid. You cannot control how toxic people behave, but you can control how you respond. And that's where real power lies. Toxic people will try to make you feel guilty, small, or anxious. They will provoke, criticize, and sometimes humiliate. And if you let them, you will feel like a puppet in their hands. But smart people don't hand over that power. They own their feelings instead of blaming themselves for someone else's chaos. They say, yes, I feel hurt. Yes, I feel frustrated. And yes, I get to choose how I act on those emotions. They also refuse to justify themselves endlessly. They don't explain every thought, defend every choice, or beg for validation. Because they know toxic people don't seek truth. They seek reaction. Smart people cultivate internal permission to prioritize their emotional well-being. They practice self-compassion. They nurture themselves in ways toxic people cannot understand. Journaling, therapy, meditation, time with supportive friends. And here's the kicker by doing this. They no longer fear confrontation. They no longer dread difficult conversations. They no longer collapse under someone else's drama. Because they have practiced standing firm in their own emotional truth, they recognize that toxicity is not an invitation to fight, it's an invitation to respond wisely. And when they respond, it is deliberate, clear, and unshakable. Smart people refuse to be prisoners of other people's dysfunction. They reclaim their peace, they reclaim their clarity, and they reclaim their life, one deliberate choice at a time. Finally, smart people embrace freedom over approval. They understand something that changes everything. You do not have to be liked by everyone to live fully. And you do not have to tolerate abuse to be kind. Toxic people will push, prod, and pressure. They will try to guilt you, shame you, or make you question your worth. And sometimes it feels impossible to resist. But smart people anchor themselves in their own values. They refuse to bend to someone else's distorted expectations. They choose integrity over acceptance, authenticity over pretense, and peace over chaos. They do not leave room for doubt about who they are. They do not negotiate with manipulation. They do not justify their choices endlessly because they know their life is precious and their emotional health is non-negotiable. And here's the most powerful truth. Walking away from toxicity is not failure. It is courage, it is wisdom, it is self-respect in motion. Every no they utter, every boundary they enforce, every step back they take is a declaration I will not shrink to accommodate dysfunction. I will not dim my light to make someone else comfortable. Smart people do not let toxicity steal their joy, silence their voice, or cloud their purpose. They choose who gets their energy, their love, and their time. They curate their relationships like the sacred thing they are because life is too short to live in the shadow of someone else's chaos. So if you want to handle toxic people like the smartest among us, remember this: protect your peace, honor your worth, and never apologize for choosing yourself. Your life is yours. Guard it fiercely and watch how powerful freedom feels when it belongs entirely to you.